Here we go. All right, so how many people have some level of familiarity with minimalism? I should have you press your raise hand button. Is that in chat that we can do that? Oh, we don't need to do that. That's cheesy. Okay, I see some hands. That's great. All right, so what are the composers whose names you would associate with minimalism? Anyone?
Philip Glass, John Adams, Steve Reich. John Luther Adams.
I can't hear you.
I'm going to mute you there, AJ, because the sound of the air conditioner is extremely loud, extraordinarily loud, actually.
Sorry, I'll be quiet.
No, I want to hear from you, but we'll just have you mute when you're not talking. So you guys were right. Those are composers who wrote what we would call minimalism. And the term minimalism is actually somewhat vague. It's not a super precise term, but there are some things that are commonly associated with it. And basically, I want to help you understand some of the history of it, so you know kind of where it came from, but also, more importantly, I want you to understand it enough so that you could include some of these techniques in music that you write. It may or may not be this week at some point. For some of you, it may be this week, but if you are already going on a different idea, obviously keep going on that, and you could incorporate this into a later project. But it's really helpful to sort of understand how stuff works. So historically speaking, the idea of minimalism was in many ways a reaction to other styles that were going on in the 20th century. And so there were composers like Milton Babbitt, for instance, who were writing music that was quite complex. Let me play you a quick clip from a piece by Milton Babbitt. This is his composition for 12 instruments. And I actually want you guys in the comment section as we go along, I want you to rate the quality of the sound that you're hearing when I play this on my computer and the microphone picks it up, okay? 10 being like a really quite good, decent sound that you could expect to get out of a laptop, and 1 being everything is so muddled and garbled that I can't hear anything, okay? Can you rate that 1 to 10 as I play this first clip? Sorry, wrong clip. Try this one. Okay, so I see most of you are getting it, but some are getting lower quality of sound. And unfortunately, I don't know a better way to do this. Florence, are you saying that you couldn't hear anything? Okay, Florence is saying it cut out because it could be the Wi-Fi. I'm on a pretty strong Wi-Fi connection, so I think if it's cutting out, it could be on your end. I'm on a really fast one. So here's what I'm going to do, folks, because a lot of what we're doing today revolves around me playing clips for you. Every time I play something, I'm going to type the name of the composer and the piece in the comment section. And that way you can look it up, and most everything we do today would be rather easy to track down. Okay? So there will be some instances where I'll say, I'm going to play such and such piece, and if you know you're not hearing it well on my speakers when I play it, go ahead and cue it up on YouTube or something really quick. That way you can follow with what we're saying, all right? So I'll give you a chance to do that, and I think that'll keep everybody on board. Okay, so what did you notice about that Milton Babbitt clip I just played? How would you describe it in terms of, you know, general style and effect and that kind of thing? What do you guys think?
Just kind of all over the place.
Pretty hard to follow, right?
Yeah.
Who else wants to comment? What do you think, Kevin?
It's sort of like all over the place, but it's also very thin.
Yes, good. Very thin. Anybody else want to comment? What do you think, Jonas?
It's kind of erratic and unpredictable.
Okay, good. Thank you, Landon. Anybody else?
It's like it's trying to simulate something, but it's kind of a vague simulation.
Okay, good. Other thoughts? Can you hear that the pitch material sounds somewhat like difficult to grasp? It doesn't sound like any traditional method of organizing pitches. There's no chords, there's no key signature that you could really recognize. That's because he was using techniques of what we would call serialism. And many of you have probably heard of serialism before. Some of you have studied it. But it's very much a sort of modernist avant-garde style, which tends to be really difficult for the listener to grasp. And so I'm setting that as a backdrop because I want you to keep in mind that when we talk about something like minimalism, minimalism was really a reaction to that. And the idea of the minimalists was, why does music have to be so hard to understand all the time? Why does it have to be so nerdy and like you need a music degree in theory or something just to understand what's going on? Why can't it be simple and transparent and easy to grasp? And by the way, I appreciate and enjoy certain kinds of modernist music. I'm not saying that that stuff isn't any good. I'm just expressing that it was kind of an extreme, and minimalism is the sort of opposite extreme. So now I'm going to play you a piece that could be an example of the polar opposite of what we just heard. So when we talk about minimalism, what we're talking about is an attempt by the composers to write something that could be immediately perceived just from listening. We will look at a score or two today, but it really, for a lot of minimalism, you don't even need a score to be able to analyze it. You can just hear it. It's meant to be very simple and overt, and almost, in some cases, almost so simple that it's sort of like in your face simple. So I'm going to start with a piece by Steve Reich, or Reich, depending on how you pronounce his name. And this piece is called Piano Phase. And well, as we go along, I think you probably will be able to hear why it's called a phase. So I'm going to play a little bit of this for you, and I'll type the information in the comment section for you, so that if you're not getting good quality from my speakers, now would be a great time to find this. We'll listen to it for between 2 and 3 minutes, which is about the length of time a person needs to really even start to hear what's going on. Okay, so here is Piano Phase. Okay, and let's stop it there. Could anybody tell me what is going on just by listening? What do you think? Let's hear from some people that haven't commented yet. What does it sound like the process is?
It's, oh, can I talk?
Sure, go ahead, Kevin.
It's sort of like this one theme, but played by like two hands, and then like sort of going in and out of focus, because it feels like they're at different speeds.
Okay.
So like they start like in parallel, and then they sort of like get ahead of each other, and then they sort of go back in.
Okay, very good. That's true. What you said is true. Anybody want to add details to that?
Well, it seems like the notes or the pitches, they stay the same, but it's more of the rhythm and like where the beats are that is changing. And so it is giving that effect that Kevin was talking about, of like going out of focus, but then like kind of coming together again. And so I think it's like mostly based around how the pitches are the same, but the rhythm is changing, and same with like the downbeats are changing.
Okay, good. So we're starting to say some of the same things, which definitely focuses this music more on the rhythmic structures than the pitches, right? You remember how we talked about in the other piece by Babbitt, that was pretty intense in the realm of pitch and rather complex. And this is very simple in the realm of pitch. So the basic motive is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 notes long.
I found the sheet music.
Oh, you found it. Nice work. Yeah.
It's like,
You're going to play it for us? Are you going to play it for us, Kevin?
it's sort of like alternating the hands.
Okay, so let's talk about how that works. And the thing with phase music that makes it different than some kinds of minimalism is the fact that it's a very specific process. And it's actually a mathematical sort of process. Let me show you a different piece. And I have the score for this one on hand. So I'm going to switch my camera to my webcam. And can you guys get, so this is bigger for you on your screen? Maybe if you move into speaker.
Go to speaker view.
Yeah, go to speaker view and you'll be able to see what we're dealing with here. This is called violin phase. And you have this rhythm, this part that happens in one of the violin parts, and this is actually intended to be a tape track. Let me get a little closer so you can see that. Can you guys see that okay? Is it?
Not really.
It's kind of blurry.
Not very focused.
Okay.
Just blurry.
Yeah, I had some problems yesterday getting my webcam to focus properly. Okay, so I actually think I can explain it just as well as I can show it to you, because it really is that straightforward. Basically what's happening with these phase patterns is one player starts the pattern, the other person or the recorded part plays the same thing at the same time, and then eventually one part shifts by one note. So it's like they're playing the same thing as the other part, but one note later or earlier. And so you get the same music layered on top of itself, but it's like one click to the right or to the left. Does that idea make sense to everybody? Listen, listen to the piano phase again, and see if you can hear how it is that happens. Okay, could you tell what one of the players did to make that happen? What'd they do? Anyone?
They
One of them,
Go
one
ahead.
of them kind of like repeated the other part like at a different rhythm, and then it could continue going in different places, I think.
Well, they kept the same rhythm, but what they actually did was one of them sped up. One of them sped up a tiny bit, so they got one note ahead of the other part. And that's the idea of phasing. Let me play you a different piece now. This is called pendulum music. This is also by Steve Reich. And this is accomplishing the same thing, but in a slightly different way. Okay, is anybody wanting to run out of the room screaming yet? Can you hear what's happening there? That's an electronic piece. So what's the process there? And again, the clue is this particular sort of phasing is very precise and mathematical. What is it that's happening? How do you get that? Let's ask Joe. What do you think, Joe?
would it be that they're using some sort of swinging thing and they're hitting different tones as they swing?
Well, it's supposed to sound like a pendulum.
Yes.
But we're wondering how do you set that up in an electronic sense to get that effect? Any ideas? Can we agree that there were basically like 4 notes being represented there in the electronic sounds? Dum ba da dum.
And they got quieter and then they came back, and then it was like there's like a center point where all the sound was, and they were going back and forth over them.
Right. So that's a good visual, but listen what it's like at the very beginning. You've got these 4 parts that are all sounding at exactly the same time, but by the time we get a couple minutes into it, it sounds
They've merged.
now they're all at different times. How does that happen? Any thoughts?
There's like a teeny little imbalance in tempo. So as it progresses, it keeps lagging a little bit behind until it's noticeable like that.
Okay, good. So now we're getting closer. And I'm gonna do a ghetto drawing for you here to demonstrate what we're talking about. So basically, we're talking about loops. Dum, ba-da-dum. Each of those notes is on a sort of loop. And you can imagine, now this piece was written long before we had a Pro Tools or Logic session that we could set up. But if we had each of these parts on a different track, it's like you have these loops that are in which each part is looping. But the other thing about it is that each part is of a slightly different length. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I've got all these different lengths. Now, I made them in my drawing, I made the lengths more drastically different than they are in the music. But imagine that each one of these things is of a different length. So what happens is, at any given point in time, if you were to take a cross section of what's going on, it's always slightly different than at a different point, because each of these things are relating to each other in slightly different ways because they're of a different length. It's sort of like a really common analogy for this kind of thing. Think of when you pull up to a stoplight and you look around you, especially if there's multiple turn lanes or something, and there's all these blinkers going. Have you ever noticed that there's certain times when it seems like everybody's blinker is going at the same time? And then if you watch it for a minute, it's like they finally get to a place where they're opposite. And if the stupid light is long enough, eventually it'll make its way back to a point where it seemed like they're aligned again. And why is that? Well, because the amount of time, the delay on everybody's blinker is a microsecond difference in length. So sometimes they align, but eventually they get out of alignment until they find their way back. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to play for you a piece that I wrote, and this is a really simple piece. I'm not sure how well I even like it actually, but I did it to demonstrate what I'm talking about here. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to let you see this MIDI piece that I put together. To demonstrate this, okay? So look at my 4 tracks. I have a piano track, a marimba track, a bass organ, and a high organ. And if you notice, each track in my music here is of a slightly different length in the way that it loops. The first one, the numbers across the top are measure numbers. So and the measures are, it looks like 4/4 time. So the top part is 5 measures plus 1 beat in the length of the loop. Can everybody see that? This little area up here shows you where the next loop starts. So this is 5 measures times 4 beats. That would be 20 quarter note beats plus 1. 21 beats long is this Steinway grand loop. The marimba, I have set starting in measure 2, and it starts looping halfway through measure 6, it looks like. So this would be like 4.5 beats long. I should say 4.5 measures long in the loop. The bass organ, I think, is just an 8-bar loop. So that one's very square. And then the high organ is the longest loop, and you can see that it's different than the others. Everybody tracking with me so far? So you have all these parts that are repeating themselves. They're all on a loop, but the length of the loop is different. And the thing that we like about that is that all the parts are always relating to each other in slightly different ways, because the vertical relationships are changing as we go because the length of the loop is different. So let's hear this from the beginning, and you'll get, I hope, the aural effect of what we're going for here. Let me make sure there we go. Okay, so I set up 4 tracks. Okay, I actually did a video of this before. I'm gonna skip ahead. Actually, I'm just gonna play you the video. Okay, so I set up 4 Dodge band. See these measure numbers. Plus 2 more is 8. So this loop is really square. Till you have is a 4-bar loop, and everybody's doing a 4-bar loop or a 2-bar loop or something really predictable, and everybody's square all the time. You don't really have minimalism. What you have is probably something more like popular music, and it could even be really cheesy, like easy listening, or just something that's atrocious to listen to. And the reason it gets boring is because it's so predictable. There's no variety. Now, what you'll hear in these sounds is that I intentionally chose diatonic sounds, and I actually get somewhat tired of the chord progression as we get toward the end. So if I was going to try to make this into an actual piece of music, I would definitely branch out with my chords. But what I want to show you, basically the whole point of this, is that you have different length loops. But what I want to show you, the whole point of this, I'm gonna skip ahead to the place that I actually play the whole thing for you. Okay, here we go. It's overlap in different ways once you get past the first loop. Okay, so I'm going to stop it there. And like I said, that's just a little example of how you could do this. And some of you guys have probably done this in ways that are different and even probably better than this. But I want to ask you some questions about what it takes to make this work. How is it that you can have all these different parts, but you can know that no matter how they line up with each other, it's still going to work musically? What do you have to do to set that up so that it's still a successful musical experience no matter how the parts line up with each other? Anyone?
Well, I think like they have to all be like the chords don't change that much, or like you don't modulate, so that like let's say you use like a C minor chord and then a G minor chord and just have those looping. Like if you put a C minor chord over a G minor chord, it doesn't sound that bad. So that if the like sort of move around, then it doesn't really sound bad. I don't know.
Excellent. That's exactly right. So you're choosing pitch collections that can work well together no matter what the combination of notes is. And you can imagine how that does kind of limit your options. You can't have radically different key areas or anything super dissonant, or some combinations are going to sound really weird and others will not. So more static pitch collections. What is the difference between the parts rhythmically or texturally? You can see here in the piano part, I had in the Steinway part, that's where I had the da-da-da-dum, the kind of pointillistic thing, the rhythmic thing. And the marimba was a lot of that pedal tone. Bum, 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 ba-da-dum, bum, 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 bum. And then I had the sustained sounds in the organ. What did I do to make those 4 elements work together? Anyone?
I feel like you kind of kept it in like the same pulse. So it wasn't like stop and start. It was just like kind of the same rhythm, but with different sounds.
Okay, good. So keeping a common rhythm is important. What do you think the significance is in having some contrast in register or texture? Why would I want some contrast as opposed to having everybody do what the piano is doing, for instance? The piano is going da 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 da. What would it sound like if everybody did something like that?
It would be really muffled and you couldn't follow it hardly at all.
So the clarity would be affected, right?
Yes.
It would be a cacophony of pointillism. You guys know what that term pointillism means? You heard it before? It's actually a term from art. And one use of the word pointillism is to create, in visual art, it's when you can create a picture using nothing but dots. So you don't have connected lines going across the page, you just have dots, and you could imagine how you could actually draw anything you wanted just by having more intense patches of dots or you know, less dots in a certain area to get a sense of darkness or light. That's pointillism, and hopefully you can also hear how it applies to what we're doing musically as well. Any other comments on how the textures work in something like this? Okay, so this first kind of minimalism that we've been talking about, it relies on something that would resemble what we might call a loop, a repetitive pattern. But what I want to point out again, and you heard me mention it briefly in the video, the fact that the pattern needs to change. Sometimes, you heard me mention pop music, and it's not that popular music is necessarily something to be avoided, but one of the things that can make some kinds of pop music much, much less artistic would be when it just does the same thing nonstop and nothing ever changes. When like if every one of my parts had been on a 2-bar or 4-bar loop and they always related to each other in the exact same way nonstop and nothing ever changed, then we might sit there and wonder, you know, is this thing ever going to change, or do I just have to listen to the same boring thing nonstop? And when you have it change, that's when some of the artistic qualities of what we might call minimalism start to become more evident. So I'm going to play you some more things now. Let's get out of screen share. So the first kind of minimalism, this was actually one of the more original forms of minimalism that was used at the beginning. We would call phase patterns. There's another sort of minimalism that's a little bit more general, and it refers to a process that we might generally call layering of sounds. This is another piece by Steve Reich, and he comes up a lot in this first discussion of minimalism that we have. He has a piece called New York Counterpoint. How many people have heard of New York Counterpoint before? Number of you? It's one of his better known pieces. And I'm going to play a couple minutes of it for you. And that should give you a chance to go and track down the piece if you're not getting good sound out of the speakers. So here we go with the first movement of New York Counterpoint. Okay, so can you hear that you have people coming in and out and that there's kind of more of a layering effect? The pattern of minimalism in this case is not as strict and it's not as mathematical as what I played for you before. I drew another kind of crude diagram so you can see what I'm talking about. It's like these were notes being played on a staff on a number of staves, and you have one part that comes in, and as it comes in, another part trickles in later, and then another part, and it's like at any given point in time, certain people are coming in and certain people are dropping out. And so you have this sound that is changing over time. The general idea of changing patterns and minimalism is one of the most important things about it, and it's been compared to a kaleidoscope. Anybody tell me what a kaleidoscope is? You guys ever have those?
Yeah.
Go ahead and tell me. What is it, Joe?
It's like a telescope with hexagonal mirrors all looking down on items at the bottom of it, giving multiple images.
Right. And so it produces a symmetrical image, and the idea here is that as you turn it, the image changes very, very slightly, and it feels like it's morphing from one thing into another. And that's the effect you get when you have all these people playing, and one by one, the parts are changing little by little. It's like this musical object that's changing, and the way it's accomplished in this case is through this process of layering. Are there any comments or questions so far? Anyone at all? Okay. So far we've talked a lot about Steve Reich's music. He was one of the important minimalists, especially at the beginning of the process. And he wrote a number of pieces that sound quite similar, actually. Here's, he had what I just played for you, which is called New York Counterpoint. Here's another piece called Vermont Counterpoint. And no, he didn't do one of these for each of the states, but he did these two states. So once again, you have acoustic instruments, flutes in this case, that are layering these parts one over the other. And I think most people agree that when it comes to the kind of things that Steve Reich explored, they were interesting things to explore, but it's not necessarily quite as interesting for somebody now to write a piece that's exactly like this. It's a process that it sort of writes itself once you get it going. And it's been done, and it's not done quite as often now. But I don't think that for us in this day and age, it's necessarily the most interesting sort of minimalism that we could seek to emulate in our own music. But it is helpful to know the background of where this stuff came from. I'm going to finish up today by playing another piece or two for you. And this will get us into some of the things that we might look at tomorrow. And as I said before, if anybody has any questions about what we've done so far, please speak up, because we will have time for some questions. Here is one more piece by Steve Reich that I'm going to play today. This is his music for 18 musicians. Okay, so I would like some thoughts from you guys. How would you describe the mood that is set by music like this? What's the effect that this music could have on the listener? Obviously different for different listeners, but what do you think? What kind of a mood does it create?
For me, it kind of feels almost like ethereal, like kind of like that mood.
Okay, good. Ethereal is a good word.
It feels like waves, like by a seashore, except they're kind of chopping in like da 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 da.
Okay, the effect of waves. What else?
Very surreal.
Almost like you're flying over clouds and you see this below.
Okay.
Feels dizzy.
It feels what?
Dizzy.
Okay, makes you feel dizzy.
Well, not really, but I'd imagine it.
Okay. Does it make anyone feel angry? I'm just kidding. Some people actually are sort of driven crazy by so much repetition. And for me, I find that some minimalism gets on my nerves after a while, and then some of it is very beautiful to listen to for a long period of time.
I'm in the annoyed by it camp.
Okay. AJ, do you find that it's different for different kinds of minimalism, or do you say that about all minimalism?
I don't want to make a blanket statement. I've had one or two pieces of minimalism that I've enjoyed, but in general, the repetition really just doesn't speak to me.
Okay. I know people that feel that way, and I can tell you that certain composers' music tends to be more that way. And I think a lot of people, if they heard something like the piano phase or the pendulum music that we played today, that would be a little bit more harsh and difficult for them. What we're going to talk about tomorrow is ways that minimalism has affected music that would be more like what you guys might typically compose. There's a style that's been called generally post-minimalism, and it's ways that you can use minimalism and incorporate it into music that's more traditional sounding, and even use it as, say, an accompaniment line to get a lot of cool, fun, energetic stuff going on, but have another layer on top that is a melodic line or something like that. So you're using the energy of minimalism, but it's not quite so in your face and repetitive. And so tomorrow, I think you'll notice that the things we're doing are a little bit more like what you might normally compose. But I'm covering this stuff today because this is the basis for it. So the last thing I wanted to mention today is to say what I actually forgot to say earlier. One of the important basis points for minimalism is an Eastern religion that kind of focuses on meditation. And you can imagine how a lot of repetition sort of makes one's brain just kind of slow down, and you're not quite so fast paced and moving, bouncing here and there and everywhere, but it's just sort of static and calming, and just sort of reflecting rather than hearing all these different kinds of frenetic patterns in every direction. And that's the basis for what a lot of minimalism came from. And then, as I said before, it's been used in a lot of different ways since then. So today we focused on Steve Reich, a name that I should also mention. He's called, this composer is called the father of minimalism. His name is Lamont Young, and he associated with Steve Reich. Philip Glass was also in that group, as well as Terry Riley. Those four guys, Lamont Young, Steve Reich, Philip Glass, Terry Riley, are what have been called the New York minimalists. And then tomorrow, I'm going to play you some examples of other composers who use minimalist styles in a lot of different ways. And I don't mind telling you that even though I respect all these composers, the music that I personally find the most inspiring in terms of minimalist styles are more like the things that I'm going to play for you tomorrow. And I might even play a piece, if we have time, I might play a piece or two that I've written that use some minimalist style to generate some really fun energy. Are there any questions before we wrap up today? Any
I
questions?
was wondering how often minimalist pieces are performed live. Like the ones that were played today, are those played live very often?
Yeah, they're played live fairly often.
Okay.
But you can imagine how a lot of these pieces would require better performers,
Yeah.
and it'd be a more intense performance. Because
Mhm.
whoever's doing it would have to be like, okay, I'm going to sit here for a long period of time and I'm going to play the same thing and I'm going to commit to this really difficult performance, and not like something you would do in your high school band or something like that.
Yeah, okay. I was just wondering because it seems incredibly difficult to like focus that hard and like play the piece well with like the other musicians, just like cooperating. I feel like it'd be so hard.
Yes, it would be hard. And I always like to remind people that you have to be careful with some of these styles, how you use them, because they do require a lot from the performer. There are minimalist pieces that have almost perpetual motion like that for 15, 20, 25 minutes or more. And you can imagine the commitment it takes from a performer to pull that off for you. So that wouldn't be the kind of thing that you'd spring on your buddies at school as a little ditty that you wrote for them. You'd have a hard time getting performances depending on who you wrote it for. But these pieces do get performed. Steve Reich is a really well-known performer, and I know ensembles and soloists that have performed some of these pieces before. So they do get played, and they are very challenging. Any other questions before we're done? Okay, well, I will let you guys go. And please come back tomorrow. Like I said, we'll cover some things that are a little bit more mainstream, a little bit more frequently heard, perhaps, and frequently emulated in compositional styles. And some of what we do tomorrow would be more like post-minimalism. And I think you'll enjoy it. We'll talk about John Adams and some other composers who wrote things since the original version of minimalism. So I will see you guys then, if not sooner, and I will let you go. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.